handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGBT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, so please, ladies and gentlemen, you can hang with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I've got a doctor with us. Woo! Dr. Meg Meeker. And Dr. Meg is a pediatrician and an author. She's also a podcaster. Woohoo! Her new release is titled, You've Got This. Couldn't be, it's a cool title, just a cool title. But the subtitle to it is Unlocking the Hero Dad Within. So, Dr. Meg Meeker, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, it's a delight, Denise. Thanks for inviting me.
So happy you wrote this book, but and I think I know the spirit of the book for sure. But what told you to write the book? Why the need?
You know, Denise, I've been a pediatrician for a little over 30 years, and so that means I've listened to literally thousands and thousands of kids, and I've watched a lot of kids grow up, and some succeed and some not. But it also means I've listened to thousands of parents, and I've seen what helps kids succeed, and I've seen what causes them to sort of self-destruct. And I thought, you know, as sort of a professional listener and observer of kids, what I wanted to do is sort of bring parents behind the eyes of children so they could go, I get what my kid needs. I get what I need to be for my child. It's a lot simpler than I think, and here I go. And I think that moms get a lot of encouragement. We have mom blogs. We have books that moms read. And we sort of empower moms a lot, if you will. But when it comes to dads, we leave them out there in no man's zone, kind of floating, going, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say, or if I'm just supposed to say, or should I be my kid's friend? Should I kind of come down? What do I do? The cool thing about men is they're very pragmatic. You give them a plan and they go, I can do that. And so I've realized over the years, in short, that the kids who have decent dads, good dads, engaged dads, I'm not talking about dads with a PhD in psychology. I'm talking about dads who are working hard to just get the good stuff right. These are the kids who fly. These are the kids who go, okay, I can really do this, because they have that self-esteem. They have that self-confidence. They really know how to sort of grab life. Those who have kids whose dads are kind of in the background, absent, not involved, those are the kids who kind of flounder. And so and we also know on a bigger societal scale, a bigger problem is that fatherlessness, and there's a father crisis in America, but nobody's solving it. Everybody goes, oh, there's a problem. Dads are terrible. But nobody said, okay, here's what you can do, and here's how you can make things work. So that's why I wrote the book.
And you know, here's another thing that, and I want you to argue with me if I get it wrong, for sure, because I think there was an era, and I even remember kind of talking about it, that children, babies, newborns, and kids became kind of a fashion accessory to women.
Oh.
And you know, it was the father, the men didn't need to be there. And that kind of dovetailed or was coupled with what was happening in the court system, because if there was a divorce, then the ruling was for a very long time, the mother automatically got custody. And so the role of the father and its importance was really secondary because the mother got custody, the dad had to pay, and he got the kid every other weekend. And so it planted a seed there, did it not?
Oh, absolutely. That era has not only come and gone, that era has expanded and intensified. I can't tell you how many times I've been an expert witness in divorce cases where dad's getting the shaft, and he's a really good guy. But what happens in a divorce situation is, parents get mad at one another. Mom goes, look, I'm the mom. My kids need me. You're a jerk. Out you go. And that's one of the worst, most painful things you can do to a child, not only with his relationship with dad, his relationship with you, the mom. Because make no mistake, those kids will grow up to resent mom.
Yes.
Because kids need, with a capital N-E-E-D, they need mom and they need dad. Moms and dads play very different roles in a child's life. We can say they don't, but we're all kids, and we all know that mom meant something that dad did. One wasn't better or worse than the other, but they bring different things to the child from a child's perspective. And I think that I went to an all-women's college in the 1970s, and I totally get the women mom empowerment thing. And I share a medical practice with my husband. So, I get all this. But here's the thing. When we make parenting about us, either as moms or dads, but moms in particular do this because we want parenting to make us feel better about who we are. We really go into dangerous areas. We make children a badge of honor and a fashion accessory. We make our kids hyper perform so that we feel like better parents. We make our kids have the sense that they need us more than dad. We make our kids, particularly if it's a divorce situation, make our kids feel that we're really the important one. We're the one who really loves them. We're the one who has their back. And dad just needs to go off and live his life. But what that tells the child is, wait a minute, mom, but I need and want my dad. So if you're communicating to me that I shouldn't like him and I shouldn't want them, rather than getting mad at mom initially, they turn that in on themselves and go, well, what's wrong with me? Because I still like my dad, even though he may be an alcoholic and even though he may be doing a whole lot of stuff you don't like. What's wrong with me that I still want the guy? See, women can divorce dads. Kids can't. Kids are hooked to their dad, for good or ill, for the rest of their lives. We all know that, because if we had a great dad, it propels us forward. If we had a painful experience with a dad, what do we want to do? We still want to please him. How many 50, 60, 7-year-old men and women are out there still trying to make their dad proud? So it's a primal need. So we mothers need to get with a program and go, one of the best things that I can do for my child is, regardless what I think of my husband or my ex or whatever, do the best I can to improve my child's relationship and encourage that man to engage his kids more and to be a better dad. It's one of the best gifts a mother gives her kids.
Well said. Well said, for sure. Now, I'm fascinated that you were part of a National Football League fatherhood initiative. Describe that.
Well, I'm fascinated, too, to tell you the truth, because when they originally called me and said, there are a number of men in here who are really trying hard to be good dads, but they don't know how. Will you help? And I said, no, because you've got the wrong person. I'm a middle-aged woman. And they said, no, you're the right person. I said, you need a man. They said, no, we need a woman. I said, but not a Caucasian one. And they said, no, here's why. Because see how we misunderstandings. They said, here's why. A lot of these men who are struggling with fatherhood never knew what a dad looked like. They never knew what a great adult man, how he behaves, how he talks to a woman. but they do know their moms and they listen to their moms. So because you're the age of a lot of their moms, thank you very much, they said, they'll listen to you. And I go, okay, I can do that. So what I found was behind the scenes of these big, brawny men paid millions of dollars to, do these crazy things on the field were a lot of tender-hearted men who desperately wanted to know what to say, how to talk to their kids, how to hold them on a lap, how to read a bedtime story, what to do with their 14-year-old daughters. But no one told them how. Literally, Denise. I would have them say, okay, so I'm a single dad and I have my daughter on Saturdays. What should I do with her? All I know what to do is sort of sit and watch TV in my man cave, and I know that's probably not the best thing. So literally, what do I do? So often it was as simple as saying, here's your plan. Because you know what? These guys know how to follow a plan. These guys know how to engage and be a team player and how to have self-control. So once I said, you've got this great skill set, let's shift it a few degrees and apply it to parenting, they go, oh, I get it. Okay. My impulse is to yell because that's all I know. And, a lot of them grew up sort of being yelled at. And a lot of them grew up not, being hugged by a dad or maybe even being hugged by mom. But if you say, well, you can do this and you can do this and you have success in you, let me help you let it out, they go, I got that. I can do that. And so that's kind of what's woven in and out the book. And I will tell you the joy in seeing a lot of these men come alive. Then the other strategic move I thought was important is, and women need to learn this, if you want to change a man's behavior, stop criticizing and telling him what to do and encourage them. So one of the things I did is I peppered my book with stories about fathers who were doing things really well. Philip Rivers is a well-known NFL player. Mm-hmm. I interviewed him for my book. I put him on my podcast. And what I wanted him to do was talk about how he loves being a dad and what he does with his kids. Because now men can put that as a story in their mind, and they can learn by a story, and they go, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. And see, the formula is so simple, and the strategy is easier. Anybody can do it, but we've approached men the whole wrong way, especially women, because we point the finger, we tell them all the things we're doing wrong, and we're out of here. And that leaves the guy going, well, now I really don't know what to do. So this is really important for us women to understand about men and their needs when it comes to parenting. A lot of these NFL guys came into their parenting experience with an enormous preload. All they knew of parenting was, bring the hammer down, make sure you're staying in school. A lot of them are kind of yelled at. A lot of them grew up in poverty, so life was very unsettled. So their idea and experience with parenting is this whole thing's pretty chaotic. So all I know what to do is sort of continue the chaos. Well, every parent comes into parenting with a huge preload. So one of the big ways you shift it is to sort of take inventory and go, okay, what were my positive experiences with a parent growing up? What were my negative ones? I'm going to capitalize on the positive and work really hard to not repeat the bad ones.
Parents are really an army of two. Would that be right, Meg, when it comes to kids?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Ask a single parent. They know it's not a job cut out for one. I mean, it's exhausting. And there's so many single mothers out there who are beating themselves going, I should be able to do this. I should be able to work, 50 hours a week and put food on the table and give my kids a nice home and spend enough time with them. And they're caving and they're saying, and they're beating themselves up. Guess what?
Yeah.
You really need to. It's not a journey that's meant to be walked alone. And as I said, kids know they come into this world with a dad and a mom. Every single kid. It's just the way it is. Now, maybe they grow up with that mom and dad and maybe they don't. But they all know in the core of who they are that there's a dad hole and a mom hole. And when one parent alone tries to be two people, a lot of people come crashing down. So the wisest thing to do is go, you know what? I really can't do this by myself. I need my husband, or I'm a husband and I need my wife. So I'm gonna work with you. We're gonna negotiate. We're gonna work as a team. We need the dad. We need the mom, and then everybody's free to fumble and make mistakes and to be better at the things you're really good at.
Yes.
It makes too much sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I would argue, Dr. Meg, this point that kids where there's not the father around, or he's kind of been dismissed and wasn't even around to really begin with, that as the kids get a little bit older, they're actually seeking out somebody that is a father role.
Oh, you don't have to argue it. I've got data to prove it. We know why 13, 14, 16-year-old girls are sleeping around with guys.
Yep.
It's not for the physical experience. They are so desperate for affection and affirmation from a male that even if it's fake, and even if the guy really doesn't like them,
Short term.
something is better than nothing. We know why teen boys are in gangs. We know why teen boys are going off the rails. They're desperate for a man to say, stop it. Here's where you belong. I will show you how to live. There's a very interesting study that was done a long time ago. There was a herd of elephants in Africa that was really overpopulated. And so the nature preserve people said, okay, we need to do something because the forest is getting overrun with elephants. So what they did is they took the female and the young male elephants and the young kids, and they put them in a different part of the forest, and they left the old male elephants. Within a few months of time, what they found was all the rhinoceroses in the area were being gored to death. And they thought, what is going on? Well, the young male elephants started wreaking havoc on other animals. And so they go, what are we going to do now? So they literally airlifted old male elephants from different parts, reinserted them in the pack, and guess what happened? The young male elephants stopped goring all the rhinoceroses. Now, obviously, kids aren't elephants and animals, but it's the same principles. A young male needs to figure out what a male identity is, and it's not the same as what his sister's going through. And in order to figure out that, he needs to butt up against something. Now, he butts up against his mother, but he knows in his heart he's 6'2", mom is 5'3". He can really motor her over if he needs to. Now, you can be a really strong mom and push back and raise an okay kid. I'm not saying that.
Sure.
But there's a primary need that a young man has to sort of figure out life as a man, and he needs the male visual, and he needs physically and emotionally a man to give some pushback and go, no, you don't. As a matter of fact, if there was a study done in men in prison in their 20s, and the researchers wanted to find out what the common factors among these men were. Was it poverty? Was it education? Was it, racial? Whatever it was. Once they controlled for all factors, they said the one common denominator was this, is that every man between 20 and 30 said to the researchers, when I was a teenager, nobody cared enough to say, stop it. And that's where a strong dad comes in.
Well, and I always used the word boundaries or limitations. Yes. There's some things that dads impart, whether they necessarily know it or not. It's courage and it's adventure, it's strength and it's boundaries.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I call it, in parenting, I call it being a brick wall. You're much nicer than I am. But the truth of the matter is, in many times raising kids, and single moms know this, you need to be a rock solid wall, because strong-willed kids, and even not so strong-willed kids, they need to figure out what their safe space is. Where can they roam in the yard? You know, they know they can't go into the yard and then get lost in the woods because they're not going to find their way home. So a good parent says, you can go here and you can go there and you can go there. It's kind of like if your child was a bowling ball and you were learning how to bowl. You toss the bowling ball down the bowling lane. If you weren't a very good bowler, you'd hit a gutter ball all the time. But what you would learn quickly if you wanted success would be to put bumpers in the gutter lanes, right? So that when you threw the ball down the lane and you wanted to strike, and that little ball's the kid, it would go in the bumper, but it would bounce off. And then it would bounce off the other side and bounce off the other side. Well, the kid's the ball and the parents are the bumpers in the gutter lane. They have to bounce off us. And does bouncing off feel good? No. That's exactly what boundaries are. Nope, you can't go here. Nope, you can't yell at your sister. Nope, you can't bite. Nope, you can't say mean things to me or break my stuff because I'm your mom. You know, and when kids have those boundaries, they feel safe, they flourish, and they feel loved.
And confidence.
And confident. And in self-control. And having self-control, they go, I can do this. I can do this. Yep, I can do that. I can live using words and not biting my sister on the arm every time I'm mad. And I'm 3. You know, so that's what grows their self-confidence.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the book is You've Got This, Unlocking the Hero Dad Within, a Dave Ramsey book selection because Dr. Meg and Dave have become fast buddies. But, you know, what's remarkable here is that, you know, you've got 20 pages of citations in this book. And Dr. Meg, I would argue that gives validation to the book into itself, because you're proving the evidence. The evidence is there, even if we have to do the rhinoceroses and the elephants.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, you know, it works. And that's why I love what I do, because I've been at this long enough to know. My husband and I raised 4 kids. We have 5 grandkids. I know it works. It's proven. It's simple. And I believe that every child and every mom is given to that child, and it's not by accident. And that every parent, every dad in particular, has success inside. He has that hero dad inside. And a good teacher or good physician, which I want to be, their job is to sort of let that out. It's not to overhaul the personality. And it's not to say, you better this, or you better this, or you better change. You know, it's just sort of say, look, you've got this, let's just let it out. Because that child wants that dad. The child doesn't want another dad. You know, we know now that kids who are many kids who've been born through sperm donation, oddly enough, many of them go back to try to find out who the donor was.
Exactly.
Why?
Well,
Because
we're in a crisis here. We're in a crisis for sure, and so your book.
We are in a crisis. Yeah.
Your book is you need to be busy and talking to a lot more people than the Denise Simon Experience, because you are needed. And congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. The book is You've Got This, Unlocking the Hero Dad Within. And Dr. Meg Meeker, thanks so much for doing this, and good luck with it.
Thank you so much, Denise. You have a great day.
All right, we're coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You are about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Stephen Mosher is back with us, and happily so. He is the author of Bully of Asia, the absolutely go-to expert on all things China, and I would add, as it kind of bleeds over into North Korea, which is obviously on everybody's headlines today. So, and for I think for quite some time. So, Stephen, thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, it's great to be back with you, Denise. Important topic today.
Yes, it is. And I would say you are mentioned in an article by Breitbart just a few days ago where you think that there might be some sabotage going on, where China is going to begin to infect these talks, diplomatic and otherwise, with North Korea. And I so agree. I've seen a lot of indications on that since the talks have happened. But tell me, I don't want to steal your thunder. What was your message really in the Breitbart article?
Well, in the Breitbart article, I was trying to make the point, but that China does not want to lose its North Korean vassal state. North Korea is a tributary state of China. It is bound to China by a mutual security treaty. It is a protectorate of China, but it is also a buffer state. What does it buffer China against? It buffers China against the example of ordered liberty, the free market democracy that is South Korea, and beyond that, Japan and the United States itself. So Chairman Mao said a long time ago that North Korea is like the lips, and China is the teeth. And if the lips are gone, the teeth will get cold. So China does not have an interest in seeing North Korea being wrenched out of its orbit and brought into the modern world. Now, I know they don't talk like that. I know they make nice noises generally in public, but that's the reality of the situation. And here's what we have in President Trump, who is, I wrote years ago some speeches for President Reagan, who was known as the great communicator. I like to call President Trump the great disruptor because he goes into a situation and looks at it with a fresh eye. Not the eye of a politician worried about the latest opinion polls, and not the eye of someone who who has, studied international relations for decades and think you always have to abide by the diplomatic niceties. No, he goes in as a hard-nosed businessman and thinks about how to change the situation. And here's what he did in North Korea. He did 3 things. First of all, he communicated to Kim Jong-un on a level that Kim understands. Now, remember that Kim is a princeling, right? Before he became the de facto emperor of North Korea. He was comforted and cosseted and coddled, and no one ever spoke an unkindly word to him, because if they did, they'd be in a prison camp in North Korea, and they've got plenty of those. So Trump communicated with Kim Jong-un on a very visceral level. He called him Little Rocket Man. He said, if you threaten the United States, I will unleash fire and fury on you. No one ever talked to Kim Jong-un like that in his lifetime before, I guarantee it. This message got through. The second thing he did was he put Kim in a box, and the box is called sanctions. And, of course, China, as always, tried to go in through the back door, right? They tried to violate the sanctions. First, by land, they were bringing over trucks and trainloads of supplies across the Yalu River into North Korea. We caught them doing that last year. And after Trump publicly expressed his displeasure to Xi Jinping, that stopped. Then they tried to violate the sanctions regime by going to sea and transferring goods and fuel and everything at sea. Chinese ships would put out to sea and meet North Korean ships in the Yellow Sea, and then transfer the goods and the fuel that needed to keep the North Korean economy going. We caught them doing that, too, with satellite surveillance photographs. And so we have finally gotten China to cooperate with the sanctions regime. And that means that Kim Jong-un is in a box, and his economy is suffering. His people are suffering, but that's nothing new. I mean, they've always been suffering, right? He doesn't mind the suffering of the masses. They're the masses, after all. They're not real people. The people that count, in Kim's view, are the members of his faction, the members of the Korean Workers' Party, the leading generals, the elite in Pyongyang. And, when their cars can't be gassed up because there's no fuel, when the lights flicker during the course of their watching the latest Hollywood movie and they can't finish their entertainment, they're upset. So I think the sanctions are pinching the elite in North Korea. And there's only one way out of the box, and that way leads to Seoul, it leads to Tokyo, and it leads to Washington, D.C. And Trump isn't going to let him out of the box until he gives up his nuclear weapons.
I agree with those things, for sure. And I would say that China, and I don't think we can take Russia out of the equation either, that they are working some serious machineries and back channels right now to perhaps unbox all of this. Because the
no doubt. Yeah.
The burden is on both of them to keep Kim in the headlines and somewhat successful. Did I get that right?
Yeah, they want to keep the United States off balance. They want to be able to play the North Korean card, which has been especially valuable to China. Okay, every time we say to China something like, you have a $325 billion trade surplus with the United States, we're going to do something about it, they say, well, wait a minute, you need us to help solve the North Korean problem. When we say you're making aggressive moves in the South China Sea, building artificial islands and putting anti-ship missiles on them, you've got to stop that. Beijing changes the subject and says, you need our help in North Korea. They don't really want to help us in North Korea, but they want to be able to play the North Korean card and keep us off balance, keep us focused on what Kim Jong-un is doing instead of what they're doing in every point of the compass, what they're doing vis-a-vis India, what they're doing vis-a-vis their Southeast Asian neighbors, what they're doing vis-a-vis Taiwan, and so forth. So North Korea is very valuable to them in a strategic sense. If we can take North Korea away from them, which I think Trump has a good chance of doing, not to make it an ally of the United States, we wouldn't want to be an ally of that brutal dictatorial regime, but simply neutralizing it, right? Opening up trade and investment in North Korea, bringing it again out of China's orbit, that changes the geopolitical map in Asia fundamentally. It takes a pawn away from China and moves it off the board. And that would be a very good thing. If the lips are gone, the teeth are going to be exposed, and then we can focus on the real problem. And the real problem that the world faces is not North Korea. The real problem is China itself.
China doesn't mind, and in fact, I would say approves of North Korea having nuclear weapons, because that into itself is the catalyst by all of these bilateral, multilateral talks and, sanctions and deals and security and all this, right? I mean, it is not even really so much that some nuclear weapon would get launched at some point. That's kind of, a sidebar. The fact that they exist.
It is, yeah, you're right. That North Korea wouldn't have nuclear weapons if it weren't for help that it got from China. If you go into the North Korean nuclear facility, you will see that the electronics, the gauges, the dials, the pressure switches, all that they're made in China. The components come from China, with, I think, the quiet blessing of the Chinese Communist Party. Because remember, the bigger threat that they can make North Korea to the United States and to Japan and to South Korea, the more they can distract us from what they're really doing. Now, we've gone about this the wrong way in the past, right? In the past, we've tried to reward North Korea and bribe North Korea into behaving itself. Well, every parent who's ever lived knows that you don't reward bad behavior because you get more of it. What you do is you punish bad behavior. And that's what we're doing now. We're punishing Pyongyang's bad behavior by imposing sanctions on them. And we're not going to lift the sanctions on a promise of better behavior. We're not going to lift the sanctions on a written document signed by Kim Jong-un. We're only going to lift the sanctions when Americans, not UN representatives and not the Chinese, that when American scientists go into the nuclear facilities and the missile launching sites in North Korea and certify that they've been dismantled, they've been gone, and take out the parts and dispose of them, are we going to lift the sanctions? And that's exactly the right way to do it. It's common sense, but, a lot of people object to the style of this president, but you can't question the substance. The substance is real. He's looking for results, and I think finally we're going to get them.
China and Russia and even Iran would be very embarrassed at some point that, the inspectors or whatever, officials and whenever officials go into North Korea to find all kinds of serial numbers and manufacturing labels from those respective countries. So is there a cleanup operation going on now, or is it just too early for that because we're not sending anybody in yet?
Well, we're not. We're organizing teams. I know we've got hundreds of experts ready to go, experts in different areas, in nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. He's got those too, by the way.
Yes.
And, of course, experts in missile assembly and launch sites ready to go in. Now, what made me laugh out loud the other day was when I saw that China said, wonderful, you have this agreement with North Korea. Let us be the guarantor of the agreement. We will go in and inspect the facilities for you. Let us send in our people, and we will certify that North Korea has given up its ICBMs and its nuclear weapons and so forth. That, of course, is laughable.
Well, Russia said the same thing.
We have no reason, of course, to trust either the Chinese or the Russians when it comes to these things. And as far as Iran goes, Korea has been providing a lot of support to Iran in its development of ballistic missiles and its nuclear weapons program. So if we can take the Koreans out of the picture, not only do we come to grips with the real problem, which is China, we also help to slow down the development of deadly missiles and nuclear warheads in Iran. So that's an added bonus.
It's a lesson learned. Yeah, it's lesson learned because of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which at this point, Stephen Mosher, ladies and gentlemen, author of Bully of Asia. But Stephen, I would say that Iran is probably watching these talks as much as Russia is right now. China is too, but China's in the middle of it. But Iran is watching every second of this, and I think at this point, those other signatories to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, meaning Europe, would be really embarrassed right about now, would you think?
Well, I think they're all going to have to decide whether or not they want to trade with the United States, the companies in Europe, or they want to trade with Iran. And I think there's very little doubt that they will choose to trade. Those companies will choose to trade with the United States and abide by the reimposition of sanctions on Iran. The final thing that President Trump did was he got Kim Jong-un alone with only the interpreters present. He didn't convene a whole large group of people, right? Because he wanted to meet one-on-one and look Kim Jong-un in the eye, because I think President Trump's a good judge of character. And he was able to do that. The Chinese desperately wanted to be present. He said no. For years, we've had these 6-party talks, right, trying to resolve the North Korean problem. So the Russians were at the table, and the Chinese were at the table, and the South Koreans and the Japanese, we were at the table, and the North Koreans, and nothing got done. And we all know that the larger the committee, the smaller the problems that get solved, the more unlikely it is that any problems get resolved. And as I say, the Russians and the Chinese really had no real interest in resolving, quote unquote, the North Korean problem at all. So Trump finally got Kim Jong-un alone in the room, and he said to him, you can change the future of the world and your country. And for goodness sake, he showed him a video about what North Korea could look like in the future, like Taiwan, like Singapore, like Hong Kong, a bright future for his people. And hopefully got Kim thinking.
Stephen, we have this thing about a peace agreement. I mean, we're in an armistice, and I don't know the sequence of events that would necessarily happen on this signing statement that Kim and Trump signed, because I call it really an anticipation document. But I would say this: we're talking about peace, and necessarily ending this conflict. I don't think anybody wants reunification of the peninsula, do they? In that meaning, Russia, China, anybody, South Korea. Nobody really wants that, do they?
Well, the Chinese don't, of course. The Russians don't, because it's an irritant to the United States, and they're sort of a spoiler, right? Putin wants to cause problems for us wherever he can, with his shrinking economy. And as far as South Korea, I think South Korea, I wrote a book about this years ago called Reunification Prospects for Korea. And the South Koreans are appalled at the idea that 10 million hungry, starving North Koreans should pour across the border if the North Korean regime collapses, because they would be faced with the same kind of problem that West Germany was faced when the East German regime collapsed. But in that case, there were 60 million West Germans, and there were 20 million East Germans when they came flooding across the border. And West Germany went through a period of about 10 years to try to integrate East Germany into West Germany, and largely succeeded. The numbers don't work quite that well in Korea's favor, because there are 45 million South Koreans, but there are 25 million North Koreans. So it would be a much bigger burden for South Korea to rebuild North Korea after the destruction and the devastation of 65 years of communist misrule. They could do it, but they're hardworking, enterprising people. But they don't want immediate reunification more than anybody else. What's likely to happen is this. I think what we've signed now is kind of like a letter of intent. Mm-hmm. And we know that letter of intent was preceded by other negotiations, and we have follow-on negotiations now. So we have a timetable in place of about 2.5 years for denuclearization. That has to happen. The sanctions will then be lifted. Hopefully we can sign a peace treaty. A 68-year war is the longest war the United States has ever been engaged in. I mean, there haven't been bullets flying for the last 65 years,
Sure.
but we're still technically at war. A peace treaty, moving the troops back from the immediate border to reduce the possibility of some sort of conflict. Opening trade and investment to North Korea. I think in a generation the regime would collapse of its own weight. The people in North Korea don't know how badly off they really are. They're starved not just of food, they're starved of information.
Yeah, outside of Pyongyang.
Outside of Pyongyang, people they're living hand to mouth. They're living in villages. They're planting crops in the spring. They're harvesting them in the fall, and there's very little left over. There often isn't enough food to get through the winter. So that's the life that has been given them by the Kim dynasty.
Stephen, we've advanced. We're 3 years into this thing, and we have officially signed some peace agreement between the North and the South. What happens to the DMZ zone and all of the missiles and artillery batteries and whatnot?
Well, the peace treaty would be between the United States and North Korea, and South Korea would be a part of it. But the DMZ is 3 miles wide. I've been in Panmunjom, which is right in the center of the DMZ, and you can. I've been in the room where the table is precisely on the border between North and South. And if you sit on the south side of the table, you're 2 feet away from North Korea. You don't go over to the north side of the table because there are armed guards on that side, and they will shoot you if you try to enter North Korea without permission. But the DMZ is the most heavily armed border in the world. You've got 1 million troops on the northern side of it, and you've got 500,000 troops on the southern side of it. You've got troop reductions, moving the troops away from the border, moving some of the massive number of artillery pieces. The North Korean Army, we talk about missiles, but the North Korean Army has more artillery pieces than any other army in the world, and they're all pointed south, of course. The northern suburbs of Seoul are only about 10, 15 miles from the DMZ. The center of the city is 35 miles away. 10 million people live there. So, yeah, they've been threatening, the North has been threatening Seoul for the South, in the South for decades. It'd be nice to see that confrontation back off, ease off, and ultimately end. Someday, I think, we never thought back in 1970, at least I didn't, 1970, 1980, that the wall would ever come down. And yet it did, because we had a president who believed in peace through strength. We have that kind of president again, and eventually the DMZ may cease to exist, and there may be free traffic between the two Koreas. We'll see.
I think one of the most important people in all this equation is Mike Pompeo, having come from CIA over to state. And he is obviously, I think, meeting with South Korea, and then he's meeting in China, and then I think he goes on to Japan, and then back over to the Middle East and solves some Gaza issues. What is Pompeo actually saying to the Beijing regime?
Well, I think it is easy to convince the South Koreans that it would be a good thing if the Korean War were finally ended. It's a fairly easy thing to convince the Japanese that we're going to be working to stop the military threat, the missile threat that Korea faces from North Korea's medium-range missiles. It's going to be a tougher sell to convince the Chinese that they're really better off if they let their vassal go. I'm sure that he will say that reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula is a good thing for China, as well as for the other countries in the region and for the United States. But remember the role that North Korea has played these last few decades as a distraction. China is going to I think try to keep North Korea in its orbit. The problem is it can't offer aid to North Korea right now. It can't offer investment. It can't offer trade to North Korea right now because it has agreed to abide by the sanctions regime. Who controls the sanctions? Well, the same country that imposed them. Only that country can lift them, and that country is the one indispensable country, the United States of America. So China has been relegated to a kind of second-tier player. I'm sure they don't like it, but there's not much they can do about it at this point.
So is there going to be some kind of an offer or trade-off, like you give us North Korea and we'll handle it, and you can keep the Senkaku Islands and the Spratlys?
No, I think that sort of a deal is now off the table because, again, Trump communicated bluntly to Kim Jong-un, put Kim Jong-un in a box, forced the Chinese to go along, met with Kim Jong-un one-on-one. And so now Kim understands that he has a real option, other than remaining a dependency of China, that he has a real option to move in a different direction. And My feeling is certainly that President Trump's gut feeling is that he's gonna move in that direction. I think we've made Kim a better offer than the Chinese can make. I don't think that Kim Jong-un and the senior Korean leadership are really all that fond of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. Remember that China occupied Korea for centuries. It was not just a tributary state of China. It was actually controlled and dominated by China. There were Chinese troops stationed in Korea. So, in a sense, Korea looks upon China as a one-time colonial power, in the same way that Vietnam does. And they do not have fond memories of that colonization.
Is there a chance then, Stephen, that China passes the baton over to Russia because of these sanctions and say, here's what we need you to do? So then Russia gets in the mix?
Yeah, I'm sure the Russians would like to be back in the mix, but the Russians have a single railway going into North Korea that is the end of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, right? 5,000 miles of rail separating European Russia from North Korea. They're really not in a position, the way China is, to provide the kind of things that North Korea needs using that rail line. I do think it is true that the rocket motors that Kim Jong-un has been using for his medium and long-range ballistic missiles come from Russia, but not much else does. So can Russia violate the sanctions? Well, it's pretty easy to see what's crossing over the border from in that little border station in the far northern reaches of Korea, where Korea has a 50-mile border with Russia. So it's pretty easy to track what goes across the border.
I think here in the next probably 8 to 10 weeks is going to be quite an interesting set of affairs. You?
I think it's going to, we're going to see things happen over the next few weeks and months. It's going to take a couple of years to finally resolve this, but we've been waiting 65 years already. So, in the grand scheme of things, if by the presidential elections of 2020, we can see the North Korean government denuclearized, if we can see trade and investment, an opening up of North Korea to the rest of the world, an end to the hermitage that is North Korea, I think we should celebrate. President Trump may still not get the Nobel Peace Prize. It turns out you can only get the Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing if you're a leftist. If you're on the other side of the political spectrum, you can probably, find a cure for cancer and still not get rewarded by
a little snarkiness there, but well said. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Stephen Mosher, who is the author of Bully of Asia, and quite the presentation. Thank you, sir, and thanks for being back on the Denise Simon Experience. I may call on you again because, there's so many moving parts to this, but thank you for being with us.
That's good to be here.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, more coming your way. Stay with us.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEVT, cast TOT 5-3.
And now,
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Gonna really change gears here and talk a little bit about the criminal justice system. So, somebody I haven't talked to in a very long time has agreed to join us here on the Denise Simon Experience, and that's Lamont Banks. Now, Lamont is the executive director of ajustcause.com, and it is a nonprofit organization that was established, God, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago now, I think, Lamont. And this is to address, concerned citizens when it comes to injustice and unfairness in the legal system. I guess we'll put it that way. So, Lamont, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I would say this. There are a lot of organizations out there that I think are trying to do the right thing, but then I think they just kind of get so frustrated because the legal bureaucracy kind of goes from the sublime to the ridiculous, state by state and court by court. Is that right, Lamont?
Well, no, absolutely. And what I've learned, what we are learning on a consistent basis, a lot of people, as far as organizations or advocacy organizations, the system is designed as really to intimidate, to cause you to back up, don't get involved with this if it's controversial, if it's something that is challenging the existing system as it is today. You get a lot of kickback. You get a lot of people that say, you know what, I don't want to mess with that, and I don't want to deal with that. But I think true advocates have an obligation, for which that obligation comes from their own conviction. If you're going to be an advocate, you have to be one. And that means, that means, going up to the front lines and getting in the mud and just telling it like it is and calling people out and holding people accountable. I think that's the major problem in our criminal justice system right now, that nobody wants to hold no one accountable. And a lot of people, not everybody, because you got some good organizations out there, but you got some people that just feel like, you know what, I don't want the drama. I don't want the headache. I don't want,
they're not up to the fight. Yeah, they're not up to the fight. They're intimidated enough to just kind of put their hands up and go, okay, I'll cave. And absolutely. And Lamont, I really believe that some of this comes from lack of education, because we don't teach these kinds of things in any kind of school system, and you certainly don't teach it in the higher academia unless you decide you want to go study law, right? So, I mean, people don't understand, the different kinds of courts, the different kinds of, what constitutes a misdemeanor and what constitutes a felony and what class of a felony, you know what I mean? So, sure. You have a job to do, and I think you need to go put it back in the education system so people feel like they've got some arrows in their quiver.
Well, I think if I can add to that, I think, and for instance, and I'm sure you've heard about the injustice of the IRP-6, known now as the IRP-5.
Right.
5 IT professionals wrongfully convicted. Horrendous conduct by the federal judge, Christine Arguello, prosecution, Assistant U.S. Attorney Matthew Kirsch. The entire process to these men was completely outrageous. Now, this is what I believe. People become advocates when it drops on their front door. Mm-hmm. When everybody has something to say. Well, our system is great, no problem. Well, let me tell you something really quickly, and to your listeners. I live the injustice personally. The IRP-5, I live that because my brother is one of the IRP-5 IT professionals that was convicted wrongfully, and the process in which they should have been given a fair trial was thrown out the window by this federal judge, by this prosecution. And so you find that once it visits your front door, People then wake up and say, you know what, I'll get in the fight because that's my mom, that's my dad, that's my brother, that's my sister. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that people have to go through this tragedy of injustice before they become empowered to do something. I think sometimes if people would open their minds and say, look, when I hear about a case of injustice, what if that was my brother, my sister, my mom? They lived that nightmare. And I think this, and you know what? People say, well, don't take it personal. Well, this is personal. When you take a man's freedom, you know what I mean? You take somebody's freedom from them and you become disillusioned because you believe, at least my mom taught us growing up, do the right thing. As long as you're not guilty, obey the laws of the land. A great, you know, and also my mom is a pastor. Rose Banks, Colorado Springs Fellowship Church here in Colorado Springs. My dad was a military man for 20 and a half years. He since has passed in 1994. But we were taught the principles of doing it the right way. Nobody thinks you're going to prison if you simply didn't commit a crime. That's in yesterday's world, we believe that, until we found out has nothing to do whether you're innocent or not. It has to do with politics. It has to do with an overzealous prosecution. It has to do with the bias, in this case with the RP5, or a biased judge against a pastor for absolutely no reason. This is what leaves people delusion, and they in a state of delusion, because it's like, is this really happening? You got pinch me, wake me up, because there's no way this is happening in America. There's no way.
Well, Lamont, you can go state to state. I mean, let's say, for instance, that you get a DUI in New York. Mm-hmm. Well, you just get a traffic ticket. But if you get a DUI, say, in Florida, man, you are convicted, and you have to do all these things before you even go before a judge because of all the piece parts and all the, I would say, organizations that want a piece of the action. And then you go into court and you spend 5 minutes in a court, and they charge you $1,400 for a court fee. But in New York, it's a $200 ticket. You see what I'm saying? So absolutely. You know, we don't have, and then for, you know, the same crime someplace else, maybe it's just a misdemeanor. You know, people have a rap sheet that's 200 miles long, everything from misdemeanors to felonies, and they're still out walking the street. They're still on probation. They've never served 1 second in prison, but you go someplace else, and you know they're in there for 20 years. I mean, it's all over the place.
No, absolutely, and that's why universally across this country, something has to be done. And here's the sad part: when you start having bias, and you start having those things happen in our criminal justice system. And you have judges, and please make no mistake about it, there's some great judges out there. On our radio program, we started a series. We did a show called Judges of Integrity, who rule with integrity from the bench. And we came across some judges that came on our show, and I want to make it clear, these were some great judges. There's a judge, Arpaio, I believe is his name. I don't know if he's in Connecticut or New Jersey. On the East Coast, but man, when I was beginning to research this guy, I've never seen such compassion from a judge. The human side of being a judge. We understand people get in trouble, but you know what? There's got to be some type of human kindness or empathy for those people who, you know what, may have just made a mistake. And people make mistakes, but do we throw them away to a system that just doesn't care? And then you have, like I said, our guys, the RP5 guys. These were IT professionals. They went out to ground zero, saw the devastation there, tears rolling down their cheeks, and said, we want to do something to make sure this doesn't happen again. And they began to develop this software that helped track terrorist organizations and worked with law enforcement agencies and went out to Washington, D.C. and demoed the software to Homeland Security and all the big wigs of law enforcement and ICE and all these people. And you just can imagine the government comes back and says, we'd like to thank you for your hard work. Here's your go to jail now card. And you sit back and think these men were trying to do something for the country. And that was to protect people from ISIS, protect people from Al-Qaeda. Because at that point, ISIS was making an infiltration into this country. And now what do we have in our country? We have sleeper cells everywhere, in every state, of terrorist people that are here. And it's a matter of a button being pushed, a order being given before this country is looking at a situation. And you tell me the government says, you know what, we don't want these guys to get credit for that software. So why don't we just the FBI go in there and raid their business with guns and say we're looking for financial records, but what you really were doing, we're looking to steal that software. That is our belief, because they never pulled. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. I don't mean to interrupt, but you're exactly right. Look at Gibson Guitar. Remember that one?
Sure.
Poor Gibson Guitar, just making, handmade guitars, and the feds go in there and take all their computers, all their inventory, because it was alleged that they were buying wood that was illegal to buy internationally. What?
Wow.
What?
Unbelievable.
Now, and I think I have this right, but Gibson Guitar did come back. They finally, were able to restore blah 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 blah. But the shadow was already cast, and now people were afraid to buy them. And I think I'm right, but the company finally filed for bankruptcy this year. And this happened 7 or 8 years ago.
And you know what's really sad about that? Gibson is a staple of the music industry. When you talk about guitars, and if you look back over the years that Gibson has, they go way back. And you're talking about a contributor to America's economy, a contributor to jobs, a contributor, all of these things. And this is what makes you wonder, what in the world is going on in America right now? Why are we going after companies, organizations that are doing good? And I'm going to tell you what, if I'm sitting back at Gibson, you know what, I would not trust, and it's sad to say, but it is the truth. They suffered a huge slap in the face from a country and from a government in which they've done nothing but provide good things. And you can might as well throw out the belief that a man is innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
That train left the station a long time ago.
Well, explain to us, Lamont, what A Just Cause is doing. You're obviously a nonprofit advocacy group, so
sure.
help us understand that.
A Just Cause organization, to be honest with you, and I'm going to tell you how it was born. It was birthed through the injustice of the IRP-6, known now as the IRP-5. That is when it was born. The story that I'm telling you about what happened, we thought it necessary to have a platform and say, you know what, this is so unjust. Not only will we help the IRP-6, now known as the IRP-5, not only will we help them, but other people that don't have a voice, that are afraid of a system, that may not understand it, as you said earlier. How do we put the bolts and screws together to fight this fight? And I'm going to tell you, you got a lot of organizations out here, not all of them, because you got some great people, and we've had a lot of them on our program. We've had members of Congress on our program. A Just Cause is about fighting not only the criminal justice system, dealing with social issues. What are we doing to fix our issues? We just did a show on Tuesday night, the bullying epidemic in this country, and the kids that have died.
Awful.
Committing suicide. And I said on the show, if bullying does that, if nothing else needs to be marked as a crime, bullying should be. And they had a young lady on there that actually hung herself, 14 years old. And you know when she did it? She did it in front of the bus stop. So when the students arrived in school the next morning, her body was there. And she put a note on her saying, this is what you did to me. So a just cause is about having these conversations, talking about how do we fix it, having that tough conversation and say, look, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about our African American young black men being shot to death without cause on our streets. We need to talk about our Hispanic brothers and sisters who are being treated so badly, and prejudiced, and all these things that go against them. The immigration situation now, kids being snatched away from their parents as they try to come into this country and separated, crying for their mothers. Where have we come as a nation? That's what a just cause is about. Addressing these issues, talking about them. And how do we do it? Then we talk about solutions. And then you know what? We're going to go to our legislators in Washington, D.C. and say, look, what can we do? This is what's happening. We're the voice of your constituents out here that voted for you. Are you going to do your job? Are you going to uphold the oath that you did? And we have a special thing on Thursday nights called Spotlight on Capitol Hill. And that's a segment we started a few years back, and we have members of Congress, because you got some great people up there that are working hard to do some things. But you know what? It's never covered. Nobody knows some of the things. And I'm telling you, we've actually come to tears on our set because of the things that we have seen and researched with these members of Congress that are trying to do some things. So I think Just Cause is about being that voice. Our logo, our motto is bringing the message of justice all around the world. That is what our purpose is. Bring justice and tell those people that are disillusioned that how do we fight a system that seems so big? You get in there and you fight. And the Just Cause says, we'll lift you up. We'll give you a platform. We'll be an ally for you to say you can institute change, but you got to have a voice. You have to come together. That's why organizations should come together. If they have one thing in mind, justice. Injustice is horrible. As Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And if it's allowed in one place, it'll be allowed somewhere else. And we have an epidemic in this country that people are distrustful of the criminal justice system. They don't trust judges. They don't trust prosecutors. You know why? Because it's become big business. It's become a quota type of system in the prosecution's office. How many cases can we do? How many people can we convict?
Lamont, in your conversations when you talk with some of these lawmakers, isn't it remarkable that we call them lawmakers and we don't really talk about repealing some of these things? Sure. I remember myself doing a show several years ago of antiquated laws. I mean, going back to the 1800s, early 1900s, that are actually still on the books today. And some of them were just the most ridiculous things you've ever seen. But you can't walk generally from your front door to your mailbox without probably violating 5 or 6 laws. And then and then you have some of these other things. If they're not laws, then you have these other nonsense. You have these regulations. For instance, here in the state of Florida, I had a dead pine tree. I had actually 2 dead pine trees in my backyard, big ones. Okay, so I call a guy to come cut them down. Well, he goes, you need a permit. Wait. I need a what? You need a permit. So I have to pay $35 per tree to permit. And the guy's got to come out to the house and approve the trees. I had to draw him a map and then put a little, yellow ribbon around the tree and then approve it. And then I still have to go pay to have the guy cut it down and haul it away. So it's my tree, not their tree.
Right, exactly right. Unbelievable.
And so it's not just laws. It's all these other cockamamie permits and regulations that hurt. And I would say that it hurts creativity and innovation, entrepreneurship. You know what I mean? Because people are too afraid. It's too bureaucratic. So we'll just go work for somebody else.
No, absolutely right. And one point I'd like to make is the corruption of the Homeowners Association. They had a situation here in Colorado. Pastor Rose Banks, beautiful home, does Christmas lights every year. People come from all over the country. We've had people come out of the country that actually went to her house. That's how beautiful the display of lights are. Do you know the Homeowners Association did their very best to fight her. And actually, one of the neighbors came out and said, "We would like you to told a police officer, we'd like you to tell this lady to take her lights down." And
yeah,
the cop
take
said
their
to her,
flag down. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what the police officer told her? I bring my family here every year to see these lights. I'm not telling her to take the lights down. You know what I mean? And it's amazing to me. And you know what? And I'm just going to say this really quick. Bottom line is, Pastor Banks' home probably the nicest. So it's a corner lot. The lawn is taken care of. And do you know people drove by of the homeowners association and actually were on the phone saying, "Well, she has this new screen up, and please tell me it's out of code. Please tell me it can't be up there." And I'm sitting back like, in the homeowners association, in my opinion, because they're not regulated. This is an African-American pastor, 73 years old. She goes to church and preaches, she comes home. That's her life. And you know what? Like you said, some laws need to be repealed, and you know what? New laws need to be put in place to protect homeowners.
And clean them up.
That's the bottom line. And you know what? I'll tell you what. We address all of this. That's why Just Cause is so broad in our reach and what we do, and that's why the work is so rewarding. Because guess what? We're dealing with issues that affect the lives of people.
Yeah, the little guy.
Say, look, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Lamont Banks, and Lamont, I feel like we could go on for hours and hours and hours. You're welcome certainly to come back. But in the meantime, to the listeners, go visit a-justcause.com and take a look at the work that they're doing, the cases that they're doing, who they're affiliated with. I mean, because this isn't just about, one segment of the population. It's everybody across the United States. We don't like this stuff. We watch and other people that should be in jail are not. So I would even argue that that part.
No,
I can
absolutely
think of
right.
So,
and if I can, let me give them also the website to our radio program, because all of our shows are archived. So they can go out to ajcradio.com. All of our programs are archived. Everything you can possibly think of is out there. Everything on the IRP 5. I'll tell you what, there's some big stuff going on. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Lamont. We're coming to your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You are about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
I like it.
Oh, thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I worked pretty creatively and hard to reach out to this stellar feller, Howard Blum, who is a journalist and a New York Times best-selling author. I think you've done 8 books. Would that be right, Howard?
It's actually now up to 10.
Oh gosh! Well, I missed
have 3
something.
tuitions to pay. You know, I had to keep on writing.
Well, your most recent release here is In the Enemy's House. And in all honesty, I will tell you that I was listening to a radio interview and heard you being interviewed. Excuse me, bought the book while you were being interviewed on my cell phone. And I was sitting in a bunch of traffic, so I already had 30 pages read by the time I even got to my location. So you have a big fan in me already. But
well, thank you.
Remarkable book, and the reason, ladies and gentlemen, the book In the Enemy's House is so remarkable, because history not only matters, but when history is put into context, then it kind of fills in a lot of things that we may necessarily have dismissed because we didn't put the work into it, but Howard did. And In the Enemy's House takes us back to the time that the Soviets / KGB had operatives here in the United States. Imagine that. And stole as much as they possibly could of our nuclear weapons program. So therein lies, I think, where Howard decided that he was going to get busy and start doing some research. Did I get that right, Howard?
That's pretty much the case. Yes, I've actually, the original information came to me from the CIA. They pointed me to a speech at the American Cryptological Symposium. And I thought, the Cryptological Symposium, that'll put me right to sleep. But I started reading it, and it was this fascinating tale about 2 men, 2 unlikely friends, a FBI agent who was a bit of a rascal, and a sort of nerdy code breaker, a genius with his head in the clouds, and how these 2 unlikely friends teamed up to hunt down the atomic spies.
But, you know, Howard, the work that you did in telling the story of how long this process was between the FBI agent and between this code breaker, and how many years and the toil to break the encryption or the codes, and to then have to translate it into not only Russian, but to understand Russian slang even. Those were remarkable resources, and the emotion, the ownership that these 2 fellows took was just remarkable, right?
Yes, it was. And the problems they faced was, as you say, quite complex, because the Russians had a very ingenious code, much more so than the Germans and the Japanese during the war. What the Russians did is they took the message they wanted to send, they first encoded it, which was putting it into a code, which is locking the door once. Then they put it into a cipher, which is locking the door a second time. And then they burned the cipher pad, which is throwing away the key. So it was encrypted and both enciphered, which made it basically foolproof unless the Russians did something foolish. And that's what they did. In 1941, when the German tanks were outside Moscow, the KGB cipher clerks thought they could perhaps have bigger problems. And they, instead of using the one-time pads just once, they used it 3 times. And this was picked up by the American code breakers, and they were now able to remove the bricks of encipherment one at a time, and they were just left with the coded message. Then comes in this code breaker, Meredith Gardner, this head in the clouds type of guy, and he works with Bob Lamphere, the FBI agent, and together as a team, they then build a dictionary for the code. It's like a giant game of Wheel of Fortune where you first try to look for a letter, a consonant, a vowel, and then you build a word, and then you build into sentences. And then even when they were done, they were left with code names. People were called Antenna or Rest or Goose, and they had to determine who these people were and then hunt them down.
Howard, were you tired by the time you finished this research? I mean, it was exhausting almost reading the book because of how you tell the story.
Exhausting and also exhilarating. I was trying to live in their shoes because they go on this wild chase, which is at first it starts off to be an intellectual battle, but then they're sending FBI agents all across America to track down these Russian spies, and the Russian spies are living in this covert world of clandestine meets, recognition signals. I mean, the Russians would go, this is their tradecraft. They have one meet on the Lower East Side where the guy was told to appear there at 10 o'clock at night holding a green tennis ball in his hand, and that's how he would, meet his conduit who was stealing atomic secrets. I felt as if I was caught up in an episode of The Americans, but it was all true.
How long did you research this, Howard? I mean, did you have to go through, CIA archives and FBI archives as well?
I spent 4 years. I spent some time with the FBI and the NSA, not so much the CIA on this story, although they first got me onto this. And what was also interesting, what made this book possible, why I could do basically what is a spy versus spy drama, is that I had access to Russian archives. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the archives from Moscow Center, the Russian spy KGB headquarters, were smuggled out of the country.
Matrokin.
These were made available, and also many of the former Russian agents, to pad their pensions and because they were proud of what they accomplished, had written very chatty and suspenseful memoirs. And I was able to put this side into the story to combine with the actions of my 2 heroes. And to get my 2 heroes, I tell true stories. At the same time, I try to make them suspenseful and dramatic. And to accomplish that, you have to know what's in people's heads, what they're thinking, what they said, what they're doing. And that was a difficulty in this case because both of my heroes, the FBI agent and the code breaker, were deceased. So I was able to reach out to their family members, and they provided me with documents, memoirs, even a diary of six notebooks that were kept by Meredith Gardner, where he documented his thoughts over the years. And these were quite revelatory. So all these pieces put together, I was able to write what I think was a true story, first-hand story, and at the same time be able to make it a dramatic, or at least hopefully dramatic.
Well, it was dramatic on its own. So, I mean, making it dramatic wasn't all that hard, was it?
Writing's always hard. I mean, how you decide to put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I come in, begin the book on a night where the 3 principals, my FBI agent, code breaker, and the Russian spy who's running the network, are waiting with dread to find out whether or not the Rosenbergs will be executed. And that entry into the story, because my heroes had begun this sort of as an intellectual exercise and a patriotic exercise, but they never realized it was going to cost the lives of people, and especially Ethel Rosenberg. They had read coded cables that said that Ethel Rosenberg was aware of her husband's participation in the Soviet spy ring, that he was an active Soviet spy, but that she, Ethel, did not work. And yet they could not share this with anyone involved in the prosecution. Not even the President of the United States knew what was going on at Arlington Hall, which is the facility where the code breaking took place. And because of this, my heroes, while they had at first a sense of elation for what they had done, also a sense of guilt and maybe that they dishonored what they had done by standing by silently while Ethel Rosenberg, her mother of two young boys, was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing.
The fact that this was a 5 or 6 year case for Bob and Meredith, is that right?
Yes, it's not actually 7 years, but yes.
7 years. And it's remarkable through all of that, it didn't rise through the ranks high enough necessarily to get to, the top of the FBI to where it had to be revealed to the president's White House, correct?
Yes. I mean, Hoover knew about it, but at the same time, decision was made to keep it secret from the White House. And why that's so particularly infuriating is that the Russians had 2 moles at Arlington Hall where this code breaking was taking place. And we knew fairly early on that these moles had passed on to the Soviets, that we were breaking their codes. The Soviets knew it, but the American president was not allowed to do this. Our spy masters said, well, this is in the national interest. But I think that's a rather disingenuous excuse. I think it's more in sort of the mindset and the mentalities of spies, part of their DNA, that one keeps secrets. It's, secrets are capital that should never be spent. And I think that was the detriment of the nation. The nation has been divided for decades, whether the Rosenbergs were guilty or not. And this partisan divide allowed McCarthyism to flourish, allowed witch hunts, the cries of witch hunts to be made back then as they are being made today. But the fact of the matter is that the way you kill witch hunts is you drive the stake of truth into the heart of the matter, and the spy masters were reluctant to do it then, and they seem reluctant to do it today.
Howard, my takeaway on the book was that there was such dedication by this FBI agent and the code breaker and those that were kind of working in their little tight-knit cell that at the very end of this, I would have thought there would have been a little bit of embarrassment to the FBI that this was going on all of this time and we didn't know it. But I didn't see any of that. But I think it's certainly lesson learned today, right?
Yes, we seem to be caught unprepared time after time. Back then when this investigation first started, while World War II was raging, the Americans, including the FBI, thought, well, the Russians are our friends. Why should we be looking into them? They are, after all, our allies in the war. Russians were dying by the millions in World War II, and we were giving them war material, billions of dollars worth in Lend-Lease. And it took some convincing once they started reading these codes that the Russians were out there stealing our atomic secrets. They literally stole from us the plans on how to build an atom bomb, and that's changed the course of the world. And now they've tried to influence an election. Who knows how successful their efforts were, but it seems, their covert war against America has gone on for over 60 years.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up that part because, it's kind of like the old cliche, everything old is new again, but in this particular case, it was just kept going. And so there's a big message here because you didn't start off writing this book knowing that concurrently as it was going to be published that we'd have this other modern day Russian component, did you?
No, for sure. I saw this as a Cold War story, a story with suspense and drama, a spy story, but also really a history. And I write on a hilltop in Connecticut. It's a beautiful place. There's fields and ponds, but literally the real world started closing in on me. I'd turn on the news each night, and I'd see what was happening on the cable channels. I'd read the New York Times, and then Vanity Fair drew me into it even more. I covered some of the aspects of the Russian investigation, starting with the Christopher Steele dossier, and I was sort of juggling the two stories, and one informed the other. And I was writing one story that was 60 years old and one story that was happening right now.
Yeah, it was 60 minutes
old. I realized the past was not past. One was a continuation of the other.
And there was a lot that really went on in between. So I think that you've got another book in process. And if you don't, then I'm telling you that you do. because
okay.
Because here's an interesting thing. Early on in the Obama administration, remember we did that massive spy swap.
Yes.
And
yes, there were Russians who were in New Jersey and elsewhere. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And so the tactics have never gone away. And I would also argue that while the focus has certainly been on the Russians, the Chinese are doing the same thing, and we're not paying nearly as much attention. Has that caught your eye?
Yes, it seems particularly so in this administration, I must say. The head of the NSA, the National Security Agency, went before Congress, and he was asked, what are you doing to combat and respond to the Russians' interference in our last election with midterm elections, now looming? And he said, nothing. I have not been empowered to do so. And that's sort of a shocking statement.
But on the other hand, the Treasury Department's laying down all kinds of sanctions, and
yes, they are. And Mueller has indicted 13 Russians, and who knows more to come. At the same time, these elections are happening soon, and we wonder if the electoral process will be attacked again.
Indeed, so. This book that you did, In the Enemy's House, it obviously had a beginning and it has an end, but I argue that it really doesn't have an end. Operation Enormous, if you will, is a prevailing tactic. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did, and I think you raise a very valid and perceptive point. I mean, this has been, Russian policy, whether you change the name of the KGB to the NKVD or the FSB as it is today, they're out to wage a covert war against America to increase Russia's power and to diminish ours, to diminish our standing in the world. And it's a very dangerous time, and particularly so since Putin is a very shrewd operator.
And, China has made that same declaration against the United States and allies.
Yes, and the greatest fear would be if Putin and China reinforce their ties, or can the U.S. very shrewdly align itself with China against Putin, maybe in the Chinese interest. Perhaps that's what we're trying to do with North Korea. They're trying different new triangulations.
Howard, since your book has hit the bookshelves, what have been the responses that you have gotten from some of the national security experts and or retired national security experts?
Well, the responses have been quite gratifying. They feel this is a story that should be told. In a way, it makes our spy masters look good because they track down what the Russians were doing, and it also is a warning that we were caught unprepared once. We were caught unprepared in the last election. Let's hope this warning is enough so that we can finally mobilize into action so we're not caught unprepared again. The responses elsewhere have been gratifying too. I mean, the New York Times, wrote a very favorable review, which I got to say I felt very flattered and grateful for.
Well, we also cannot forget that, what was it, Howard, in December of 2016, when the Obama administration expelled more essentially Russian spies. They were undercover, obviously, for diplomatic titles and whatnot. And then we closed not 2, but 3 DACAs. And then Trump just did that again. So we obviously have some real constant infection that's happening here.
Oh, we are well aware, as our CIA and FBI are, that foreign agents are at work in America, just as, thankfully, our agents are involved in the Soviet Union and elsewhere. At the same time, this covert war is being played out in the Middle East and Syria with Russians' involvement there. They're using private troops, quote unquote private. They're actually working for the Kremlin and for Putin. The situation is a very precarious one. What you need is heroes. And the 2 men in my story, the FBI agent and Meredith Gardner, were heroes. And we hope that new heroes will exist who will get to the bottom of things.
I was reminded at some point, Howard, because of your book, that in some confab that Truman had with the Russians, that they had said, we have this nuclear weapon and we're going to use it to end the war. And, Moscow at the time said, we already know about it. And obviously they did, didn't they?
Yes. I mean, we weren't quite sure. Actually, Stalin didn't act surprised when Truman told him this, and he didn't make a big deal about it. And we were wondering, how could he know about this? But he already did. And we had given them the plans. The plans were so easy for taking. One of the spies who literally gave the Russians a primer that built the bomb was a 19-year-old college student from Harvard who went out to was recruited to work at Los Alamos. He went up to the Russians and volunteered to work for them. Another was a German refugee, Klaus Fuchs, who we were able to track down. My hero FBI agent tracked down, and his identification came, and he was sentenced to jail in Britain for 14 years. But it was too late then. The Russians already had the bomb because of him.
You have done a service, for any of the readers and listeners out there. Please grab this book, In the Enemy's House. Because I think now what you have done, and maybe I don't know if it was your intention or not, Howard, but you have begun to reveal what the world looks like through the FBI Bureau's lens, through their eyes. And once we begin to understand that, some very modern day scandals and decisions kind of come into context. Would you agree?
I would agree. I also would suggest that I try to show what the world looked like through the KGB's eyes, too, and what they were doing, and that sort of mindset that they were pursuing, their sort of dedication and their inventiveness and ingenuity and their dedication is also going on today. And these two spy versus spy, this counterintelligence story, is one that we're all living through in the papers today. And none of us know, really, how this is all going to play out in the months ahead as the Mueller investigation unfurls.
When you were doing your research, Howard, what was the more remarkable thing that you uncovered that you didn't expect?
I think on one level, the existence of Arlington Hall, this code-breaking facility that was kept secret from the American public, for 50 years, where we were reading the Russians' mail, and not even the president knew what was going on there. Arlington Hall was a former girls' finishing school across the Potomac that the government bought. It had a large manor house, swimming pool, stables, acres of gardens, and we had 4,000 people working there, and this secret was kept for over half a century.
I'm going to throw this little sidebar into you, Howard, and the question will go like this. maybe we ought to check a little bit harder on the visa applications on people that are coming into the United States from, I would say adversarial countries, because they seem to keep coming in, whether they're Chinese or whether Iranian or Russian or anything else, and they end up being something else completely different. What would you say?
I mean, yes. I mean, Soviet agents and assets are brought in. Some of them are working in the embassies and the consulates. Some of them are illegals. That is, they're here just as spies with no diplomatic immunity. But there's no doubt about it, and that's what the FBI is hopefully doing as we speak, trying to identify them, keep tabs on them, and track them down and interrupt their work.
And then the front companies, we have this whole thing going on right now with the Confucius Institute, which is nothing more than a spy agency for the Chinese, and that's operating in our university system.
Yeah, I mean, one wonders sometimes, the FBI is out there helping us. At the same time, they're asleep at the wheel too. The Soviet espionage squad of the FBI is letting every now and then things fall through the cracks, and that is dangerous. I mean, we were caught largely unaware and unprepared of the intervention in the last election and the Soviets' attempts, and perhaps successful attempts, to manipulate it. One really doesn't know to this day what the Soviets accomplished by their intervention.
Well, we were caught unaware with Crimea and Ukraine too, right?
Yes, and now we're talking about allowing us, or bringing the Soviet Union back into make the G7 the G8. So it's strange. We seem to have forgotten about what happened in Crimea.
Well, I'm not forgetting, and I know that you're not forgetting, so you might be my new best friend. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Howard Blum, who has 10 books. I missed 2 somewhere along the line. 10 books. New York Times bestselling author, and the book is In the Enemy's House. Just a remarkable piece of work, and I'm just so gratified, Howard, at the energy and the time and the attention that you gave to this project for 4 years. It's a very telling story, and it is so important for even today. So, Howard, thank you so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and very best of luck with the book.
Thank you, and a pleasure speaking with you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us. See you again soon.